Yeah, they always told me that I could be heard clear across the football field, and I try. Uh, we're happy to see everyone, and we have so many new faces. It's so nice. I am Sarah Faye Martin. I am the current president of AAUW. And let's just take a moment and go around and please introduce yourself and please let us know. Are you a guest? Are you a current member? I don't remember how many years I've been a member.
Okay, I'm Joe Pichard, and I'm a member, and I have a couple guests here, and they'll introduce themselves.
Thanks. Yes. Well, I see so many people I know. I am Sharon Harris Johnson, and I was invited by Joe, and I came to the first meeting when the awards were given out because I knew both women who were receiving those awards, and you really picked two good ones. So I told her I can't come all the time, but I'd like to be a member. So.
Hi, I'm Vivian Robinson. I'm a member, a recent member, and I'm so glad to be here.
I'm Jan Radke, and I was invited by Joe Pichard. So she's doing a good job. And so I am contemplating becoming a member. So, yes, with one stipulation, I have served all the boards I'm ever going to serve on. And so no, if you have an office in mind, forget it. That's not mine.
I'm Nelda Hinckley, and I've been a member so long I've forgotten, but I did appreciate the reminder I got from Joe Pichard, and that's why I was here tonight. I would have forgotten otherwise.
Okay, Jolene Smith, and I'm a member.
Joshka Hubers, and I am the social, what am I? Social director. Oh, that's fun.
Hello, I'm Samara Maktoum. I've been a member for 10 years and currently a treasurer for AAUW.
Hi, I'm Susan Perlman. I've been a member too long to remember. And I'm the recording secretary for the board meetings and sometimes like tonight for the business meetings.
I'm Charlie Howe. You can hear me because I've been in politics. I'm not so much a guest as probably an interloper. My parents brought me here in 1952, and so I've been an on and off resident ever since then and retired for the last 24 years. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Martha Ellert, and I'm, what am I? Membership Vice President at the present time for AAUW. And I'll hand this over to Linda Flowers. And
I'm Linda Flowers, and I am a member. Can't make it all the time. Our NAACP has our exec committee meeting on the second Tuesday also.
Thank you. I'm so glad Linda made it tonight. She has quite a schedule. This is Olga Widener, and I've served in every capacity, and I've been a member for more than 50 years.
I'm Eileen Trout Irvin, and I'm the corresponding secretary, and I can't remember how long I've been a member. I think it's at least 20.
I'm Ella Lacey, and I've been a member for about 25 years, and I'm immediate past president.
I'm Janet Banerjee, and Joe Pichard invited me too.
I'm Mary Pullman, and this is my first year as a member.
I am Gregory Kupiak, and I've been a member for a number of years. Happy that Joe called me to make the meeting. Joe is the everyone's friend.
And we'd like to say thank you this evening to the library for allowing us to use their facilities, and Liz for being our tech amazing person. And a special thank you to the hosts who have provided our treats this evening, Piroshka And Ella, thank you again for providing for us.
Okay, thanks, Sarah Faye. Well, we're very happy to have all of you here and also our Zoom attendees. So we're hoping we have some people who will join in by Zoom. Alee is somebody that my husband has worked with and has known for quite a long time. And he suggested that this would be a great program for us last year. So I'm so happy that Alee can join us. I'm going to introduce her and then just say another word about what she does. Alee Quick is the Director of Civic Engagement for the national education nonprofit, the News Literacy Project, where she manages organizational partnerships and training events for independent learners and promotes the organization's resources for adults. She previously was an editor at the Southern Illinoisan and worked at the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute. She is also the longtime trivia host at Hangar 9, which I was just asking her about. I thought that was pretty interesting. Before Alee starts, this is some information about the News Literacy Project, and I think it kind of brings into focus what they're all about. So the challenge, it states, the crisis of mis and disinformation is an emergency that threatens the very fabric of our democracy. Too many people lack news literacy skills and feel powerless to do anything about the flood of misleading and harmful content polluting our informational landscape. This lack of news literacy is a threat to democracy. A democratic society cannot function without a well-informed public and a vigorous, independent, free press. So that is really what the News Literacy Project is about. So we will have a question and answer period at the end. And let's welcome Alee. Thank you.
Why should we care? And how do we know what to believe? And how do we know what to believe is a pretty complicated question that's rather involved, but we're going to at least peel back the first layer of the So Joe provided a wonderful introduction, but I have one of my own as well. My name is Alee. Once again, I am, thank you, Director of Civic Engagement for the News Literacy Project. Once again, what that means is that I manage our organizational partnerships. Part of our strategy for reaching all the adults in the country, you know, just a little goal there, is that we form partnerships with civic organizations like the AAUW, for example. Some of our partners include AARP, Factchequeado, which is a fact-checking website that works with Spanish language speakers in the United States. So that is some of that. I also plan events from small small events like this one and bigger ones for corporations and larger organizations like the League of Women Voters, National Institute for Civil Discourse, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. And I promote all of our resources for adults. You'll learn a little bit about all the work that the News Literacy Project does, but my work focuses specifically on our resources for people who are outside of traditional classrooms, so no longer attending middle school or high school, so college on up. And as Joe said, I previously was at the Southern Illinoisan and the Paul Simon Institute, and I host trivia at the Hangar and have done so for many years. And you may also recognize me from the band Squidwhip. We're all here tonight, so maybe we'll play a song for you when this is done. Okay, so what is news literacy? That's our first basic question that we're going to answer tonight. News literacy is an approach to learning that seeks to teach learners how to think about news and information, not what to think about any particular source. No one in my organization will weigh in yes or no on a particular news outlet. What we hope to do is give you the skills to evaluate for yourself whether a source is credible and whether or not you should believe what they have to say. We want to develop a healthy skepticism, but not cynicism. We think that cynicism contributes to deepening polarization. Therefore, what we seek to help people do is to be skeptical, think twice, maybe 3 times about the information they see, but not give up altogether. We also seek to understand that the press is a cornerstone of democracy, and we want all of our learners to walk away with an appreciation for the First Amendment. So, the News Literacy Project as an organization, we are a national education nonprofit. I still work and live here in Carbondale, luckily for me. I have colleagues all over the country and even one in Canada. We do have an office in Washington, D.C., but we are everywhere, and our staff thankfully reflects the diversity of the country that we seek to serve, both geographically and demographically. Our mission is that we provide programs, resources for educators and the public to teach, learn, and share the abilities needed to be smart, active consumers of news and information, and equal and engaged participants in a democracy. Our vision is that news literacy will be embedded in the American education experience, and that people of all ages and backgrounds know how to identify credible news and information and feel empowered to be actively part of our civic life. We were founded 15 years ago by a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who formerly worked for the LA Times. His name is Alan Miller. And early on, we focused primarily on creating classroom resources for middle and high school students. I mentioned that earlier. As a result of that, we have built up a strong educator network. We reach students by first reaching educators, and our tools are in use around the country and even around the world. Around 2020, some things happened. There was a pandemic. There was also an election that was contested based on falsehoods. And that showed us that we needed to broaden our mission. So we created another pillar and have focused some work in the last couple of years on reaching the public and adults. And that's when I joined the organization to be a part of that work. We believe that information is the basis for civic literacy, agency, and action. And basically, when I walk into the voting booth next year, I want to know that I'm making decisions about candidates and issues based on facts and reality, not by embellishment, lies, or even hoaxes. So news literacy helps people make these sound decisions on matters of self-governance. It gives them the skills to think critically about the information that's coming at them. We think that social progress requires healthy discourse. We do not seek to eliminate disagreement, but we seek disagreement based on facts. We want to start from a shared set of facts and disagree on matters of policy and how to fix our solutions, but we at least want to start from a common ground. And we need to prioritize credible sources to protect ourselves from misinformation. We are all vulnerable. We're all vulnerable, right? How many of us in this room can say with confidence that we have never been fooled by anything we saw on the internet, right? And this is the kind of stuff that tends to get me, right? So I wanted to bring an example in here, and we'll come back to this a little bit later because I'm hoping that you'll walk away tonight with 3 essential news literacy skills, and this is going to help us get there. But what we see here is something that seems pretty heartwarming, right? We have Mr. Rogers and Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter, some beloved characters, and here's Mr. Rogers wearing a Good Vibes Only t-shirt that has Bob Ross's picture on it. There's even a rainbow in the background. This is just one of the coolest things ever, right? Who knew that these 2 people had even met and hung out in front of a rainbow? It's not real. And we're going to go over how we come to the conclusion that this is not real, because when we're scrolling, right, social media and see something like this, we just think, oh, that's so cool. So we'll talk more about that. And this may seem really harmless, right? Something like this. I mean, who cares if Mr. Rogers and Steve Irwin met or not? There's a rainbow in the background. What's the big deal? Well, I argue that the same forces that allow something like a Mr. Rogers, Steve Irwin hoax to go viral also is doing some more harmful things, right? So this is from our website called Rumor Guard, which I'll tell you all a little bit about later. But I've got a couple of examples just from the past week of some kind of misinformation that we've addressed on this platform. And here's one that's kind of funny. Everybody was kind of laughing. This insinuates that there is a help desk at an airport in Austria that will help you if you meant to go to Australia. Well, this is not real. This is satire that's actually been stripped of its context and shared as if it's real. So this might not seem like such a bad thing as well, but it gets a little more sinister. Also, from late last month, AI generated content is distorting events in Gaza. This is an issue that's extremely difficult to talk about right now. And it's one that concerns US foreign policy, right? So it's very important, it's very heated. And while we are trying to muddle through based on the things that we know to be true, bad actors are using artificial intelligence technology to muddy the waters further, right? So the same thing that creates an environment where Mr. Rogers and Steve Irwin have their arms around each other posing for a photo, it's the same that's allowing stuff like this that's a little more harmful to spread as well. And finally, we had an election last week on the 7th, and predictably, rumors, hoaxes are spreading around that as well. And what we have here is sowing distrust in one of our most essential institutions, which is our elections, right? So again, kind of the same factors that are allowing the spread of something harmless are allowing the spread of something that's much more harmful. And the same skills that help us tell the difference between what's real and what's not can help protect us from something very serious like this, right? So I figure the best way to give you a good introduction to News Literacy Project and the work that we do is to give you a little news literacy lesson. So I hope you'll forgive and indulge this little news literacy lesson. That's what we're going to move into now. So what is news and what makes a news source credible? We start with a very basic definition of news. It should inform you through fair and impartial reporting about local, national, and international events, issues, and people of significance or of interest. And so, simple enough, right? But there's a lot more to it. So one of the things that we teach is that there are seven standards of quality journalism that any reputable, legitimate news outlet would follow. And we call these outlets standards-based news outlets. Now, we're setting aside what their opinion page might say. We're talking about the actual news that they produce. Do they adhere to this set of standards? So what are the 7 standards? One of them is that they use multiple credible sources. And you should be able to look at any news report or news article and identify multiple credible sources. These can be eyewitnesses, people who were there, who are in a unique position to know specific details. It can be an official. Oftentimes officials can be the only source for some information, but they may release some details and keep some to themselves for some strategic reasons. There are also experts that may be quoted in news stories or news articles. These are people who are knowledgeable, independent, sometimes they're academics, for example. And something that's becoming a little more common and a little more questioned is the use of unnamed sources. So in a standards-based news report, we would think that unnamed sources are typically known to the journalist and at least one editor. Just because a source is not named in the story does not mean that no one knows who this source is. And anonymity is often used as a last resort, and only when the information provided is compelling, in the public's interest, and cannot be confirmed on the record. And legitimate outlets will never publish unattributed information from a truly anonymous source. Somebody needs to be able to trace it back to its source. And oftentimes you'll see in the story explaining this is why we are choosing to use this anonymous source. So oftentimes in a standards-based news outlet, you will see that they'll actually justify and explain to you why they're doing that. You'll also find documentation. This is another standard of quality journalism. Documentation can include reports, studies, data, audio recordings, things sometimes gathered by FOIA in Illinois, Freedom of Information Act. So this is the law that allows journalists and the public to seek records of public interest. There are, of course, some stipulations to that, but you'll oftentimes see in a story, this was obtained through the Freedom of Information Act. We also seek verification. Number 3, verification is the essence of journalism, and it's a set of practices such as getting details of an event confirmed by multiple sources that's designed to ensure accuracy. So one example of this is if I have a document that I have received somehow, I may verify that document by speaking to a source who's in a position to know, right? So that's a way that we can kind of cross-reference and verify the information that we're getting from one source with another. And journalists are responsible for ensuring their facts are accurate and are typically checked by editors. We can get more into issues of local news if we would like the discussion to go there. I will say that in my tenure as a journalist locally, as an editor, I checked what I could. And I will say that with staffing cuts, it becomes a challenge. So you may notice that sometimes reporters are responsible for fact checking their own work, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, that's the reality. Another standard is fairness. Fairness means treating sources and subjects with respect, giving subjects a chance to share their point of view, reaching out to people for comment on a story that mentions them, and giving people the chance to respond to assertions or allegations made about them. Balance is another one. And now we're getting into the more complicated ones, right? So seeking balance is accurately presenting all relevant sides of a story, presenting opposing viewpoints impartially and accurately, but not necessarily equally. Both sidesism is not balance. Both sidesism being, okay, I've got somebody saying this thing, oh, I better find somebody saying the opposite no matter what, right? That's what we consider both sidesism. Ultimately, journalists need to go where the evidence takes them, and their reporting should be transparent about that. An example could be climate change. The preponderance of the evidence shows that climate change is real and that it's caused by people, and journalists do a disservice if they present it as unsettled science. So both sidesism is not actually serving our readers or viewers or listeners in a case like that. Context is very important. We want to present facts in a way that makes their meaning clear, fair, and accurate. And when we talk about misinformation, one of the examples I showed earlier about the Australia airport confusion was satire stripped of context. Context can make all the difference. And we want to avoid bias, getting into our most complicated one, right? So we want to present facts and context in a dispassionate manner. And remember that questions of bias must focus on news. We have to differentiate news from other types of information like opinion and advertising, and that's something that news literacy seeks to do as well. Articles written and published as opinion or commentary are expected to show bias and reflect a viewpoint, and that's why it's important that they are labeled as such and that we know what words to look out for so that we know something is an opinion article rather than a news article. I wanted to get a little more into news media bias because I find it's a topic that we kind of all want to talk about. So how do we define news media bias? It's when assumptions or opinions favoring one side or interpretation of an issue or event skew news reporting in a way that is unfair or distorting. And once again, when we talk about bias, we have to differentiate between the type of information that we are consuming. We get asked a lot about these kind of media bias charts. And this is it's a little bit small on the left here, but basically what these charts do is they put a variety of content creators on a chart and they say, this is left-leaning, this is right-leaning, this is center. But my organization thinks that these are a bit limiting. So they're inherently based on perception, right? Who is creating the media bias charts? So who decides what's biased, what's center, what's left, what's right? what's left to me may be right to you. What's right to you may be left to me, right? So when we talk about these media bias charts, we also have to evaluate who's actually deciding where these things fall. So again, inherently based on perception, and they often reflect opinion and commentary of a given organization, not news reporting. While an outlet like the Chicago Tribune, their opinion page tends to skew one way, right? But their news reporting is standards-based, well-reported, often accurate. You know, they use those 7 standards that we've gone over, but their opinions tend to reflect, you know, a given side. But that doesn't mean that their news reporting should be considered biased. We also think that these media bias charts present a false equivalence between standards-based news organizations and partisan sources. So on one of these charts, we have the Associated Press listed alongside OAN, Newsmax, Democracy Now!, and The Nation. Are these all apples to apples comparisons? These news outlets, does the AP have the same goal, or as The Nation, for example? I would say that they're pretty different. They also suggest that most newsrooms have an ideological goal, which in my experience, they don't. And the structure of these charts reinforces a notion of the media as a monolith. So we have to be careful with things like this when we talk about bias. Essentially, what I'm saying is it's complicated. There are many different types and forms of bias. It's not just one thing or another. We have partisan bias, demographic bias, big story bias, corporate bias. There's all kinds of different things that can inform whether something ends up being biased or not. There's also framing, tone, story selection. Again, it's complicated. Another thing that's really important for any standards-based news outlet is accountability and transparency. Essentially, what this means is showing your work. Journalists should always be transparent about what they know, how they know it, and what they don't know. So especially in a situation of breaking news, you may see a story that says, you know, as a press time, we just don't know X or Y. And any news outlet needs to be transparent about those things so that you know the information that we're operating with and without. Look for corrections. We all make mistakes, right? Journalists are people. I spent 6 years in a newsroom. I made some really dumb mistakes. And nobody wants to be the person who has to say, we need to put a correction on page 2, but I've been there many times. And what this is telling you is not necessarily that it's bad that they made a mistake, because it's bound to happen, but that they are interested in correcting the record. So when you see a news outlet making a correction, that should make you feel a little bit better, knowing that they can own up to their mistakes and try to make it right. News outlets should also disclose relationships between their organizations and the subjects of their story. So these are all things to look out for. So why do people believe misinformation? Why is it so easy for us to look at some things like Australia, and go, haha, that seems true? Well, there are several factors. Confirmation bias plays a major role. Basically, it feels good to find information that confirms what we already think. It helps us calm our fears, makes us feel like we better understand the world, that what we thought turns out to be right. We also can connect with other believers online. While before social media, it might have been hard for somebody who believes the earth is flat to find another person who believes the earth is flat. Now it's pretty easy. And I feel a connection when I find someone who thinks what I think. Misinformation also relies on emotions to spread. Emotional manipulation is huge. There are 2 different kinds of reasoning, emotional and rational. Basically, emotional reasoning is where we come to a conclusion based on what feels true, whereas rational reasoning involves evaluating evidence, facts, and assumptions to determine if a conclusion is supported logically, even if that conclusion makes us feel bad. And any emotion can be manipulated. When we talk about it, emotional manipulation, I think we all think about anger and fear and sadness, but humor and joy and hope can be manipulated just as well. Misinformation is designed to elicit a strong emotional response. Our emotion centers override rational thought processes, and we react by amplifying without thinking much about it. And again, we especially respond to things that feel true. So I promised that you would walk away with 3 basic news literacy skills. So aside from our 7 standards of quality journalism, I want to do a little exercise. So we're going to talk about critical observation, which is basically when I see a piece of information, what do I notice about it? How does the content make me feel? Things like that. We'll also talk about lateral reading, which is an essential skill for kind of fact checking on your own. And then reverse image search is something that is just really handy. So first I want to try critical observation. So this is the image that I brought up earlier. I've already given you all the spoiler that it's fake, but if I hadn't, is there anything about this image that stands out to you and makes you think, perhaps based on critical observation, that it warrants further investigation? Okay, Mr. Rogers' arms look different. Anyone else? Okay, so it's been shared in 2021. So the question is, when is this photo from? That's a good one. They've both been dead for a while, right? So, you know, photos can live on and be shared at any time. But yeah, that would definitely be a clue. Sure. Okay, hairstyles. Anything else that stands out? It should be Jerry Garcia instead of Bob Ross. That's a good one. So we're questioning the motive here. That's, you know, one thing that people often notice, and it may be because this screen is a little bit bright, but if you look kind of closely, you can tell that the shadows on their faces are actually different. Steve Irwin looks a little more shroud, like you can see under his nose there that he's a little more shadowed, whereas Mr. Rogers looks a little brighter. So that's kind of giving us a clue that maybe something is off. Oh, thank you. Look at that annotation. Yes.
Irwin's shadow is at 12 o'clock. Rogers is at 10.
Okay, so Irwin's is at 12 o'clock. Rogers is at 10 o'clock. Thank you. Yeah, where the sun is hitting them. Exactly. Exactly. Yes, thank you. You've said it more eloquently than I could. And just, you know, the fact that there's a rainbow in the background and the rainbow on his shirt, like we're just feeling it's a little too good to be true, right? So, okay, these are all critical observations, right? Oh, I still got my annotation up there. So once we think to ourselves, okay, there's a few things that are standing out to me. I'm feeling a red flag. My spidey sense is tingling. First of all, I've acknowledged that this is triggering nostalgia and joy, and that's a strong emotion. I've done my critical observation. Now maybe I want to try lateral reading. So lateral reading is where you verify what you're reading while you're reading it. So let's assume that we're scrolling Twitter, which is where that was originally from, that post, that picture. I can open another tab in my browser and make a search with some verifying information from other sources. I can look up key details and evaluate the sources that kind of pop up to see what I can learn about them. And so basically we're kind of fact checking as we go. And I'll show you that in just a second. What happened? Let's see. You can also try a reverse image search. There are a couple of different tools to do that. If you will indulge me, let's see. So is this still working on the Zoom, do we think, or is it just showing my PowerPoint?
I am not seeing it in Zoom, but if there's anything that I can do to help out, just let me know.
I think I will just do a new share and that should work. Technology. Okay. So, is that good? Thank you. Okay, so tineye.com is a reverse image tool where we can basically upload the picture in question and see what kind of information might pop up on the web in response to that. So I've got this image shared, saved on my desktop because I was preparing for this, but you can download it and kind of have it saved and upload it to something like this. And with TinEye, what I actually want to do is look for most changed, because my hunch is that perhaps this is photoshopped. So that would require the image to be changed. And the first thing that comes up is the original photo of Mr. Rogers. And we can see here that he is wearing kind of a more plain t-shirt. It's got a little logo on it here. So that's giving me a clue, right? So I've got some information here that might kind of lead me to this. And this is a lot of what I'm seeing is the same picture of Mr. Rogers. There's no rainbow in the background. That is not a t-shirt that has Bob Ross on it. So that's starting to answer some questions for me. Let's see. I also wanted to show you Google image searching. Google kind of changed how they do their image search. I don't think it's quite as useful as it used to be, but it's still, you can do something similar. So sorry, if you go to google.com, let me slow down. If you go to google.com, you'll see the regular search bar where you could type a search, but you'll also see a little camera. So you can search by image and actually upload a file. And I can do that same thing. And I'm gonna kind of narrow in. There's some little brackets here that allow me to narrow in on this. And I am not getting a lot of great stuff. It's basically showing me the same kind of photoshopped image that I already had, right? So not a lot of help here, but what I'm seeing here is Twitter, Know Your Meme, Facebook, Twitter. These are all user-generated sites where anybody can post anything. So I'm not feeling really confident that this is real by looking at some of these. So that's a little demonstration of reverse image searching. Lateral reading, where we are opening another browser tab and doing a search independently, might give us a little more information here. So something that might be worth looking up is Steve Irwin and Mr. Rogers photo. So I'm just going to search that in Google and see what comes up. And look here, from Reuters, which is a news organization, we have a fact check, altered image of Fred Rogers. USA Today, another news website, fact check, image claiming to show Steve Irwin with Mr. Rogers. And then Snopes. I really like the Snopes article, so I'm going to pick that one. This is actually written by Dan Ebon, who now works for the News Literacy Project, so I know him. So I like this one. So is this a picture of Steve Irwin hanging out with Mr. Rogers in a Bob Ross t-shirt? And Snopes has determined that this is false. And the cool thing about Snopes, the reason I like it so much, that's snopes.com, is that they'll actually go in great depth about how they figured it out. So they found the original account that shared it. They've gone to the trouble of looking at this Instagram account, and they found that this Vemix commonly will Photoshop celebrities together who are kind of asynchronous pairs. So he's also Photoshopped Kurt Cobain with Tony Hawk, Michael Jackson, and the Notorious B.I.G., people who really have no reason to be hanging out. But that's kind of what this account does. So we've got that information. And then they found this same image that we found on TinEye of the original Mr. Rogers pointing at this other kind of more plain t-shirt. And we've also found the original photo of Steve Irwin, and that's his dad, I think. So we can see kind of the origins and how this came to be. So that's what lateral reading has taught us, right? So we found a couple of keywords based on the content that we were looking at and typed it into a search engine, and we had several results that we could kind of compare and evaluate for ourselves. Let's go back to our PowerPoint. Okay. So we know how to fact check, but it's kind of a bummer. Do we need to check absolutely everything we see? There are a few key times that we might want to fact check something. If you're planning to share something with others, especially on social media, if you are not absolutely sure that it is true, You may want to open a browser tab and Google it, or put an image into a reverse Google image search or TinEye and double check it. If you feel unsure or skeptical, great. Check it out before you share it. If something is connecting to a deeply held belief or a strong emotion, that is a really good indication that you need to take a second and check it out. And of course, it's also it's also important to ignore some things sometimes. Invest your brain power in quality information and invest your difficult conversations in the people who are worth talking to. And remember, you don't have to police everyone all the time. I am not going around every comment section going, that's wrong, because that's not very fun. But if someone I love, repeats a piece of misinformation or something like that, I will say something. Okay. So before liking or sharing, just a few things. Pause, be aware of your emotions, do a quick check and ask yourself, is it news or is it user generated or is it opinion or is it an advertisement? These are the things we should be asking ourselves. Okay, now for the short plug portion. My organization is the News Literacy Project, and all of our resources are available at newslit.org. I mentioned RumorGuard earlier. This is a website that teaches you common trends and tropes of misinformation, so you know what to look for and hopefully what to avoid. That is rumorguard.org. You can sign up to get emails or even text messages if you're so inclined, with some of those tropes and trends. Some of those earlier examples I showed you came from RumorGuard. We have a newsletter called Get Smart About News. This week we had 3 tips from Dan, who wrote that Snopes article that I like so much about how to avoid misinformation. So that was really good. We have a podcast, and we also have free events where you can learn even more news literacy skills. On Thursday, we are having a webinar at 6 p.m. in collaboration with the National Institute for Civil Discourse and the League of Women Voters of the United States. My colleague spends a few minutes talking about some debunking skills. He talks about some of this lateral reading, reverse image searching that I went over. Then our partner at the National Institute for Civil Discourse talks about strategies for having difficult conversations. And our friends at the League of Women Voters talk about how to find reliable election information and how to help your communities access that reliable election information as well, which is even more important as we lose some news resources locally and we have an election coming up. So please register, and I hope you will join us on Thursday. And if not, sign up and you can get the recording and all the resources. And at this time, I'll be happy to take questions. Oh, sure. If you must comment, I suppose I'll indulge you.
Here, one moment. Let me give you the mic here. And then I do have a question or two as well from online for hello to our Zoom participants.
Hi, Mom.
Okay. I sort of got into this subject when the Vietnam War was going on, and I came home and read some of the newspapers. And this was way back in 1970 or somewhere around there when Nixon was the president. And you could see by one certain picture where he was amongst the troops, and that his face had been plastered on there amongst the soldiers around him, because his shadows and face and everything simply didn't match. So I knew that was phony. Secondly, yesterday in the newspaper that you used to work for, the Southern, they published how state politics, 2 politicians in Springfield got the nuclear reigniting approval for nuclear plants in Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
And my big gripe with this issue, and I wrote a letter to the editor years ago when a professor up at SIU Edwardsville came out for it. Well, let's have more nuclear plants in Illinois. My mother's cousin and her husband before her lived downwind in Golden, Colorado from a nuclear plant, Rocky Flats. Both of them died from cancer. They still have not figured out how to deal with radioactive waste. and there was nothing in the article about radioactive waste. My third utterance has to deal with ladies here. Now, I know, Elizabeth, what she plays. I don't know what you play. Thank you.
In the band. Thank you. Let's see. So as to the Nixon photo, we are lucky these days that we have reverse image searching and we can verify things like that, right, when we see them. As far as what the article in the paper mentioned or did not mention, something that your local newspaper should hopefully do is provide contact information for the reporters who write the stories. And I hope you will feel free to, and I know you will because I worked at the paper and I know I've spoken to you before, to reach out to them and, you know, talk about your feeling on the way that they wrote the article. I think that part of news literacy is holding news outlets accountable for what they may leave out or include, you know, whatever the case may be. And as a consumer of news, I hope we all feel empowered to interact with our local press. I think that's really important. And in the band, I play keyboard. You also sing. And I sing.
I have a question from online here. This is from Lynette. And I think this goes back to the bias scales. Sites like Ground News and YouTuber Beau of the Fifth Column always promote checking sources and media literacy, as well as unbiased reporting from AP, Reuters, BBC, NPR, and PBS. NPR has been criticized for having so many experts on who use the words "I think" a lot. I hope you can hear the quotation marks there. Who does the evaluating on the news versus opinion pieces, and does that label the print or audio visual media unfairly? So who watches the watchdogs, I think?
Yeah. Well, a larger organization like NPR will have an ombudsman who sometimes does give commentary live on the air. And basically that's the person, again, they're employed by the news organization. So take that as you will. But their job is to basically explain why the outlet made a decision that it made in a given case. And I have listened to commentary from NPRs in the past and found it to be, you know, informative at the very least. The other thing that I'll point out, you know, given whatever media you're consuming, your clues as to whether something is opinion, analysis, you know, straight news differ. In the newspaper, we have the opinion page and we have things like column signatures is what we call them, where you'll have a little label on the top that will say, you know, commentary or op-ed or editorial, and then a little signature at the end and usually somebody's photo, whoever wrote it, unless it's an editorial from the editorial board, in which case it will be labeled as such. Also, you know, some clues in a newspaper that something may be opinion is the word analysis, right? Analysis basically insinuates I'm a person, I'm looking at all this information and I'm analyzing it for you. And that's inserting my experience and the information that I have based on my research and my experience as a journalist or whatever. So there are these little things that are giving us clues. And I think the person who's asked the question online has picked up on one of those clues that we can hear on the radio, which is somebody saying, I think, right? So if somebody's saying, I think, then we know that's their opinion. And whether they're an expert or not, now we know that's, you know, and is their opinion based on fact? Sure, maybe it is, you know. When I worked at the paper and wrote editorials and columns, I wasn't just spewing, you know, maybe sometimes, but oftentimes, you know, if I'm citing an opinion, I'm hopefully giving some evidence as to why I came to that conclusion. And that evidence should be rooted in fact, hopefully. So opinion isn't always BS.
There's two kinds of journalism. The very speedy kind that CNN puts out there, and you've got somebody, there must be terrific. Sorry, there must be terrific number of, all right, I'll start over. There's two kinds of journalism. The kind of journalism that you have time to research, get accurate, and report, write, and consult. with a lot of people. And the kind that CNN puts out there that is quick breaking news comes across. How many people do they have working on that to come up with all those facts real quick, particularly in a war scene?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. It just depends on the source. I mean, obviously CNN is a very large organization that has, you know, hundreds of people working there. I think breaking news is one of those times where we urge people to be really careful. When breaking news is happening, especially in war, you know, especially with what's going on in Israel and Palestine right now, there's a lot that we don't know when a situation is unfolding in real time. And so we just caution people to keep that in mind, that, you know, if something is labeled breaking, to take that with that grain of salt, that, you know, they may not know everything. And tomorrow when we wake up, this information we have may be drastically different than the information we have right now. So news outlets need to be transparent. Again, like I said, about what they know and what they don't know. And 10 minutes. As news consumers, we also need to acknowledge that when a situation is unfolding, we just need to be careful. We need to be careful and acknowledge that we don't know everything yet. And sometimes it just takes time for everything to come to light.
Which do you prefer to do?
To do, I mean, I think there's a time and a place for everything. And, you know, when I was an editor at the paper, I prefer when something is breaking and then becomes something a little more in depth later. I mean, I think everything is that way, right? We're living through something that's happening in real time, and maybe a week from now, somebody will analyze everything I've said and come up with like all these different ways of looking at it. And so, I mean, I think everything is everything, right? Like, but actually from being a journalist, there's a thrill to breaking news. And there's also a thrill to getting a FOIA request back. And it's a document stack that's this thick, and you've got 4 people with pizza, like going through everything and highlighting. So it's all thrilling in one way or another. Yeah, there's a lot of really good journalism content out there.
I just wanted to make a comment about healthcare. And I used to teach, you know, medical terminology, physiology, anatomy, and so on. And I was always alerting my students on sources. I mean, and certainly when we have a disorder, we feel like we have some kind of something wrong with us. Please be aware that when you put that disorder up on Google or whatever, the first several things you're going to get are by drug companies trying to sell you a pharmaceutical for that disorder. Please scroll on down to Mayo Clinic or some other trusted source to see what that disorder really is about. But I think too many people nowadays are going on the web and on Google for their medical, you know, information, and you really have to be careful there.
Thank you.
I have a question and a suggestion. Have you been invited to address the School of Journalism students at SIU? They need to hear from you. Have you?
I actually went, I was invited by the Dewey Center at SIU and spoke there on the 24th of October. So I don't know how many students were there, but I was there. So, and any SIU class that wants to have me, you know, I'm here in Carbondale.
Well, I will put in a suggestion to the chair of that department. The next one is you need to know, since you're a nonprofit organization, you need to make the United Nations Foundation aware that you exist.
Okay, thank you.
I know Johnny Logan did a survey pre-COVID, you know, but it was
how do you get your news? Ask the students, how do you get your news? And the vast majority got it all on social media. That
Which
was the
isn't
source.
necessarily a bad thing. If a social media post is, you know, leading you to a news outlet, okay. And, you know, sometimes people say things on social media that are true. It's just.
Well, I hope you can get into the schools, because as a public school teacher, retiree, it's so needed. So that's part of your program, right?
Absolutely. A huge part of our program. The work that reaches adults is newer, but for, over 15 years, we've been creating resources for middle and high schools. And if anybody knows a local educator that wants access to these resources, I will be happy to point them in the right direction.
Well, thank you, Alee.
Thank you all so much for having me.
Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to close this evening by telling you about our next meeting. It's Tuesday, December 12th at the Dunn Richmond Center at 7:00, and it's called Brave Gowns and Hearts. And Abby Kauser Barnett will be the presenter. She is a medical social associate with Children's Medical and Mental Health Resource Network located in Anna, Illinois. CMM-HRN is part of the SIUC School of Medicine's Department of Pediatrics and serves the southern 45 counties of Illinois. Abby will share ways in which CMM-HRN helps children who have experienced abuse and or neglect, and will also tell us about their brave gowns. And Susan had a picture of that. There was an article about Abby in the last, what's the name of that again? That comes out, but with the Southern. Yeah. And she'll be bringing some of her gowns too. So we hope that you will all come. We'll have the business meeting at 6 and then the refreshments at 6:30 and the program at 7. And thank you. And yes, the library closes at 8. So, but thank you all very much. Thank you, Alee. It was great.
Thank you.